As the flight ascended into the clear skies, passengers in first class settled into their seats, ready for a smooth journey. The atmosphere was calm, with quiet chatter filling the air. But that serenity was soon shattered when flight attendant Megan Parker made an unexpected announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice sharp and unsettling, "there is a passenger on board who is carrying illegal substances." She pointed directly at Caleb Johnson, a well-dressed black man seated in 3A, his face still impassive as her accusatory finger stabbed through the air. The words hit like thunder, and the whole cabin fell silent in an instant. Caleb's heart raced, but his exterior remained composed. The passengers, unsure of what to make of the situation, began pulling out their phones. Flashing red record lights filled the cabin as people anxiously started filming. Megan held up a small vacuum-sealed package of white powder like it was a trophy, the evidence of Caleb's supposed crime. "This package was found in this man's possession," she continued, her voice louder now, as if trying to cement the accusation in the minds of everyone present. "This is illegal, and it has no place on this flight." The murmurs grew into whispers, and then louder voices, some sympathetic, some judgmental, spread through the cabin. Caleb could feel the weight of their gazes. He was being judged, the scrutiny sharp enough to cut through him, but he remained still, holding his composure like a soldier preparing for battle. As the murmurs grew, Megan's actions became more frantic. She signaled to the flight security team, who quickly moved to Caleb's seat. They surrounded him, blocking out the view of other passengers, and began to escort him down the aisle. The indignity of it was hard to bear. Caleb's mind raced, piecing together what was happening. He hadn't seen this coming. Not this. Megan Parker's words rang in his mind, but they were laced with something deeper now, something more sinister. He could feel her eyes on him as she smirked. She was pleased with herself, her sense of victory apparent in every step. She believed she had just uncovered a criminal, someone who had thought they could slip through the cracks. But Caleb knew the truth. She had just framed the wrong man. As Caleb was escorted off the plane, he leaned in close to Megan, who was still holding the package like a badge of honor. His voice was low but steady. "You have no idea what you've just done," he whispered, the words carrying more weight than she could understand. She had no clue that her accusation wasn't just directed at a random passenger, but at a top CIA operative. Megan's expression faltered for just a moment, but the thrill of the moment quickly overpowered any brief hesitation. "Don't get too cocky," she shot back with a smirk, watching him being led away. "This is what happens when people like you think they can get away with things." She turned, her eyes briefly meeting Caleb's before he was lost to the crowd. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Caleb Johnson wasn't just any first-class passenger. He was an agent with the CIA on a covert mission to infiltrate a drug-smuggling operation within the airline. And what Megan had just done, it would be the catalyst for a much larger investigation that would unravel everything she thought she understood about power, race, and justice. The plane was silent again, but only for a moment. The camera flashes, the social media posts, and the whispers in the cabin would soon make this the most watched flight incident of the year. No one realized the man they had just humiliated was about to turn the tables on them all. Caleb didn't just carry a mission in his bag. He carried the weight of a much bigger plan, one that Megan had unknowingly triggered. As airport security led him toward further investigation, he remained calm. His life was about to change, but it wouldn't be the way Megan thought. He wasn't the criminal here, she was. Caleb Johnson had spent over a decade working for the CIA. At 38, he had shattered every barrier, whether it was his race, his background, or the biases ingrained in an old elitist intelligence community that never expected someone like him to rise to the top. Born in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, Caleb knew how to fight for every inch of ground. He'd been underestimated his entire life, and he'd used that to his advantage. It had made him one of the agency's most skilled and discreet operatives, but few knew the extent of his accomplishments. Despite the challenges, Caleb's path through the CIA had been nothing short of extraordinary. His ability to read people, understand their motivations, and predict actions before they happened had earned him the respect of even the most seasoned agents. His mind operated like a finely tuned instrument, catching the smallest details most agents overlooked. He had been part of countless high-profile operations, missions that had saved lives, protected national security, and exposed intricate webs of crime. But those stories rarely made the news. Today, however, was different. He wasn't just another agent. He was the newly appointed head of the CIA's Covert Aviation Security Division, a division designed to combat a specific growing threat: the use of commercial aircraft to smuggle high-value illegal substances across the country. The assignment was risky, highly classified, and required an agent with the highest level of skill and discretion. Caleb was chosen for this assignment not only because of his proven track record, but because of his innate ability to blend into any environment, to see things no one else could, and to hear whispers in the noise. On the morning of this mission, Caleb had been preparing for a flight from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. As he packed his carry-on bag in his hotel room, his secure CIA phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from Director Reynolds, a man who had personally selected him for this job. "Caleb, the airline's CEO is aware of your cover. No one else knows you're on the flight. As far as the flight crew is concerned, you are just another first-class passenger. Your mission remains classified at the highest level. We've identified a potential drug-smuggling operation within their network, and your job is to identify the players involved." Caleb paused for a moment after reading the message, his mind already working through the details. This wasn't just about observing, this was about infiltrating, gathering evidence, and identifying who was behind the operation. It was high-stakes work, the kind that could make or break careers or end lives. But Caleb had never flinched from danger. He packed his bag with methodical precision, taking care to ensure that his own personal devices and equipment were hidden in plain sight. Everything he needed to complete his mission was in his briefcase, hidden beneath the cover of ordinary travel essentials. The secure phone, designed to look like an average smartphone, was loaded with encrypted apps that allowed him to track, document, and analyze any potential threats in real time. His job was clear: to find the drug smuggling ring operating inside the airline and expose it without blowing his cover. As Caleb made his way to the airport, he moved through the crowded terminal with his usual practiced calm. He observed everything: the movements of the maintenance workers, the conversations between TSA agents, the nervous glance of a mother hurriedly trying to get her children to the gate. Every detail was logged. Caleb could see the small discrepancies that others missed: the outdated security badges, the rushed exchanges, the way the flight crew looked almost too comfortable in their surroundings. Caleb's mind processed everything, but his face remained a neutral mask. His primary mission for this flight was to assess the behavior of the crew, especially Megan Parker. The name had come up in the briefing as one of the key players in the smuggling operation. Megan, with her perfect smile and sharp appearance, had flown under the radar, but Caleb's instinct told him she wasn't as clean as she appeared. As Caleb walked down the concourse, his eyes kept flicking to the flight attendants moving through the crowd, noting their every action. When he passed by, he caught a glimpse of Megan in the staff lounge, scanning through the flight manifest and exchanging whispered words with a colleague. Her demeanor was stiff, rehearsed. The resentment Caleb saw in her eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't just a job for her. This was a chance to control her own destiny, to make money and climb out of the financial hole she had dug for herself. Megan didn't know it yet, but Caleb was already evaluating her. Every movement, every glance, every word was being assessed. Caleb wasn't just on this flight to gather intelligence. He was on it to ensure that the drug smuggling operation wouldn't go unchecked. He was prepared for whatever came next. Megan Parker had always been the image of perfection. At least that's what she wanted people to believe. At 32, she had worked her way through the ranks of the airline, presenting herself with a professional smile, impeccable uniform, and flawless demeanor. Her blonde hair was always styled to perfection, her designer watch gleaming, and her manicure always on point. To the outside world, she was the epitome of success, but the reality was far from glamorous. Beneath her polished exterior, Megan was drowning in debt. The bills had piled up, the loans stacked higher than the credit cards that were maxed out. Megan had always been careful to maintain her image, maintain the illusion of a perfect life. But the truth was that she was on the verge of collapse. The promotion she'd been eyeing for years had gone to Alyssa Johnson, a younger, more qualified flight attendant. Alyssa, a black woman, had achieved higher customer satisfaction ratings, and Megan had been passed over. They only care about diversity now, Megan had complained bitterly to anyone who would listen. It's all about quotas and making sure they have the right look in the higher positions. Her resentment was thick, simmering beneath her well-rehearsed smile. She hated how things had changed. The world had moved on, but Megan hadn't kept up with the times. She couldn't handle the shift, the way her colleagues, especially those from minority backgrounds, were steadily advancing while she was left behind. But it wasn't just about the promotion. Megan's resentment was growing in every corner of her life, a constant ache that wouldn't go away. There was no escaping the mounting pressure of the credit card bills, the overdue rent, and the constant worry that she might lose everything she had worked so hard to maintain. It was a weight she couldn't ignore. The stress had made her increasingly bitter, and it had begun to cloud her judgment. The financial strain had led her to make some dangerous decisions. 6 months ago, desperate to maintain the lifestyle she'd built for herself, Megan had accepted an offer she knew she shouldn't have. A first-class passenger, someone she barely knew but who always tipped generously, had made a proposition. He'd offered her a deal, move a small package through security for him, and she'd be paid handsomely. The money was too good to refuse. It was enough to pay off her debts, enough to keep her head above water for another month. The risk was minimal, the reward too tempting. At first it had been easy, just a small package slipped into her crew bag. But soon the requests grew more frequent. The packages were larger, more valuable. It didn't take long before Megan found herself entangled in something she couldn't escape. Every flight became a careful game of cat and mouse. The more she did it, the more she craved the power that came with it. No one would ever suspect her, a flight attendant with perfect credentials, a woman with a smile that disarmed everyone around her. She was invisible, slipping under the radar, while she moved thousands of dollars worth of illegal goods across the country. The flight that day, the one that would turn her life upside down, had been no different. At least that's what she thought. Megan had arrived at the airport earlier than usual, already feeling the weight of the day's flight pressing on her. She couldn't afford to miss a beat. As she passed through the employee entrance, the security guard barely looked up, but he made a passing comment. "Late again, Megan?" he said, his voice tired. She waved it off, her perfect smile never faltering. Inside the break room, she reviewed the passenger manifest, her eyes scanning over the names. "First class isn't what it used to be," she muttered to Tyler, a fellow flight attendant who had become her occasional confidant, though they never discussed anything too deep. She skimmed over the names, each one a potential target. As they discussed the boarding process, she couldn't help but notice a few names that made her uncomfortable. More people of color. Her distaste was clear in her tone. "They'll let anyone in first class these days," she scoffed, her voice laced with barely concealed judgment. Tyler's uncomfortable chuckle didn't mask his discomfort at her words, but he said nothing. To Megan, it wasn't just the diversity of the passengers. It was the way they seemed to take up space in the places she believed were hers to command. The way a person like Caleb Johnson, a black man, could afford to sit in first class, despite not having the right credentials or the right look. She couldn't stop the flash of irritation that crossed her face when she saw his name on the manifest. A black man in first class. Something about it unsettled her. She whispered to Tyler, "I don't know what he's doing up here." Her voice was barely a murmur, but it was enough. Little did she know, Caleb wasn't just another passenger. He was exactly the kind of person who would bring everything crashing down for her. As the flight soared higher into the skies, the first-class cabin settled into a quiet routine. Most passengers had their eyes glued to their screens, lost in movies or books, while the flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks. For Caleb, though, there was no real relaxation. He was always aware, always watching. His mission was still in full swing, and despite the calm, his mind was sharp and focused, noting every detail. Megan, on the other hand, moved with a practiced grace. She was smooth and efficient, offering her usual warm, professional smile to the passengers. Her interactions with the white passengers were friendly, warm, even jovial, but her demeanor shifted when she reached Caleb's seat, It was subtle, but it was there. The forced politeness in her voice when she asked, "Anything to drink, sir?" was enough for Caleb to notice. "Sparkling water, please," Caleb replied, his tone calm but deliberate, showing no sign of the anxiety that was clearly bubbling beneath Megan's composed surface. He noted the coldness in her response, the sharpness in her eyes, and how quickly she turned away after handing him the drink, as if eager to move on. It was another small detail, but for Caleb, it was another piece of the puzzle. The flight continued uneventfully for a time, but Caleb could feel the tension hanging in the air, and it wasn't just from the other passengers, it was Megan. He noticed her fidgeting, her eyes darting around the cabin, her hands trembling slightly as she passed out drinks. It was subtle, but the signs were there. Caleb was used to reading people. He could see it all in her behavior. She was nervous. Then as the flight reached its cruising altitude, Caleb pressed the call button above his seat. He waited and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Megan walked past his seat, helping other passengers with their requests, but she ignored his lighted call button. Caleb could see her glance at it briefly, but continue on her way. When a white male passenger pressed his button from seat 2C, Megan was by his side within seconds, smiling and cheerful as she asked, "What can I get for you, sir?" She quickly brought him his drink, exchanging pleasantries with him before returning to her duties. It wasn't just bad service. It was blatant discrimination, and Caleb could see it clearly. The difference in treatment was stark. Caleb remained calm, keeping his face neutral, though his mind was calculating. He had been on many flights, but never had he experienced something so pointedly dismissive, so personal. After another few minutes, Megan finally approached Caleb's seat again, this time with a forced smile. "Did you need something, sir?" Her tone was flat, the ma'am absent. Caleb's voice remained even as he spoke. "I requested a blanket twice. It's quite cold in this section." Megan's eyes briefly flickered with impatience before she responded. "We're running low on blankets, but I'll check if there are any left." She walked away without another word, leaving Caleb's request unanswered. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes. Caleb wasn't just a passenger to Megan. He was someone beneath her notice, someone who didn't deserve the same level of care that the other passengers received. And Caleb knew this wasn't just about a blanket. It was about power, it was about control, and it was about race. As the flight continued, Caleb kept his attention fixed on Megan. She moved through the cabin, but something about her seemed off. He watched her glance nervously at her crew bag whenever she passed by, the way she checked over her shoulder before disappearing into the galley. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, and Caleb's suspicions grew. It wasn't just bad service. Something else was going on. He had seen the signs before, in his previous operations, when people were involved in something illicit. A few minutes later, Caleb saw Megan walk toward the first-class bathroom, her crew bag in tow. He knew what was coming. Megan was preparing to make the drop. He watched closely as she entered the bathroom, then emerged 2 minutes later without the bag. She seemed a bit more hurried now, her steps quicker, less controlled. Caleb's mind was already processing the next steps. He had seen this before, smugglers making quick exchanges, too nervous to fully cover their tracks. As Megan walked back to her seat, Caleb saw the man who followed her into the bathroom. A well-dressed passenger Caleb had noticed earlier returned to his seat. He didn't think much of it at first, but when the man reached into his pocket, Caleb caught a glimpse of what looked like a bulge that hadn't been there before. His instincts kicked in. The drop had been made. Caleb had enough. He wasn't just a witness to bad service anymore. He was an agent on a mission, and he had just gathered enough evidence to confirm his worst suspicions. Megan Parker wasn't just an unruly flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder. She was part of an operation, and it wasn't just drugs being moved on the flight. It was something bigger, something that had been happening for far too long. But Caleb knew better than to make any immediate moves. He would need to be patient, to gather more evidence, to ensure everything was in place before he could expose the operation. And more than that, he would need to keep his composure. The calm he had maintained all this time would be the key to getting through this unscathed. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. What had been a smooth and seemingly mundane flight now felt tense. filled with an undercurrent of suspicion and uncertainty. Megan Parker, despite her best efforts to act calm and composed, couldn't shake the anxiety that bubbled just beneath the surface. Her earlier success in planting the drugs in Caleb's bag felt like a hollow victory now. Every time she glanced at him, she saw nothing but a calm, collected man who hadn't flinched at the public humiliation she had orchestrated. Something in his eyes unsettled her, but she brushed it off. She had won, hadn't she? Then came the moment of reckoning, when most passengers had either fallen asleep or immersed themselves in movies. Megan seized the opportunity. She walked to the galley, her hands shaking slightly as she opened her personal locker. Beneath a layer of cosmetics, she pulled out a second package. This one her personal stash. A small amount of illicit pharmaceuticals, a reward for her involvement in the smuggling scheme. For a moment, Megan hesitated. She looked around, ensuring no one was near. This was the final piece, her payment for everything she had done. She slid the small package into her apron pocket, planning to deliver it to another crew member later. But Caleb was watching her. From the corner of his eye, he saw the nervous glance she shot around before slipping the package into her apron. This was no longer about bad service or unfair treatment. This was about something much darker. Caleb had seen enough. Megan Parker was no longer just a flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder. She was deep into a criminal operation that spanned multiple flights and involved a network of accomplices. The moment she walked back toward the passengers, Caleb's mind was already working. He needed more than just suspicion. He needed evidence, and the evidence was about to come to him. As the flight continued, Caleb could feel the tension building. He remained poised, observing Megan's every move, but now he had a plan. He knew she would make a move. They always did. And when she did, he would be ready. Sure enough, Megan soon approached Caleb's seat again. This time her actions were deliberate. She leaned over his seat, pretending to straighten the pillow and blanket. But Caleb knew what was coming. With lightning speed, she slipped the small package into his handbag, the very one that had been the target of her earlier accusation. Caleb didn't flinch. He remained completely still, his expression neutral. He knew exactly what she was doing, and he also knew that this was his moment to act. Megan smiled to herself, pleased with her cunning. She was ready to create the scene that would justify her actions to the crew and the rest of the passengers. Caleb didn't seem to notice, and that made it all the more perfect. As soon as she had returned to her duties, Caleb stood up and calmly walked toward the restroom. He didn't confront her. He didn't rush to make accusations. Instead, he took a moment to collect his thoughts and prepare for the next step. When he returned to his seat, he noticed Megan keeping a careful eye on him. He sat down, casually checking his bag and pretending to adjust his belongings. Then he glanced at Megan. Their eyes met. Caleb's gaze was steady, unwavering. Megan, for a split second, faltered. She had no idea that everything she had done, every move she had made, was being documented. Minutes later, Caleb pressed the call button once again, signaling that he was ready for action. Megan approached his seat with a tight smile, ready to explain herself. But this time, her composure cracked. Caleb was about to expose her. "I've just noticed something," Caleb said calmly. His voice was low but sharp. "You've planted something in my bag. That package isn't mine." Megan's eyes widened for the briefest of moments before she composed herself. "What are you talking about?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but Caleb could hear the slight tremor. "I haven't put anything in your bag, sir. Perhaps you've mistaken—" "I know what I saw," Caleb interrupted. "I think you should check your bag, Megan." Megan's heart began to race. The walls were closing in. She didn't have time to think. She immediately signaled to the air marshal who had been watching from the back of the cabin. It was a desperate move, but she had no choice. Within moments, Caleb was approached by an air marshal who took his bag and began to search it in front of the other passengers. As the marshal pulled out the small package Megan had planted, the gasps of the passengers filled the air. "Is this your package, ma'am?" the air marshal asked loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. Megan's face turned pale, but she tried to recover, playing the role of the shocked, innocent employee. "I don't know how that got in there," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not mine." The moment was surreal. Caleb knew this was his chance to expose the truth, and the evidence was irrefutable. "I didn't put that in my bag," Caleb responded, his voice steady. his eyes locked on Megan's. "That package was placed there by you." Megan tried to argue, but the mounting evidence and the damning nature of the footage that had been secretly recorded by Caleb's CIA device were enough to unravel her story. The other flight attendants who had watched the exchange from a distance knew something was wrong, and when they checked the footage from the flight's cameras, the truth became undeniable. By the time the flight landed, Caleb had already made his call to CIA headquarters. Megan and her accomplices were arrested and taken into custody. Later at the airline's headquarters, the truth was revealed. Megan Parker wasn't just an unlucky flight attendant. She was a key player in a multi-million-dollar drug smuggling operation. The video footage of her planting the drugs and passing them to other accomplices was shared widely, and her web of deceit began to unravel. The public reaction was swift. Social media flooded with outrage at the racial profiling and wrongful accusation. But the story didn't end there. Caleb Johnson's intervention in the subsequent investigation exposed a vast network of criminals operating within the airline. Megan Parker, along with several others, was arrested for drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. She was sentenced to years in federal prison. Caleb had done more than just stop a criminal. He had exposed an entire operation and brought justice not only to himself, but to the many passengers who had been targeted because of their race. And as the dust settled, Caleb knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice and fairness would continue, but sometimes one act of courage could be the spark that ignited real change.